Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of an experiment called Life with Alex Mackenzie. That's me. On this episode, I'm going to be talking about how I got into stand-up comedy. But before I get into that, I wanted to say I'm here in Australia. So we just landed in Australia yesterday. It is February 4th today, and we're here in Perth. So we're starting our Fringe World festival run. So it's like a stand-up, well, it's a fringe festival. So I'm doing comedy shows though for the next 2 weeks. I think I do like 11 shows in the next 14 days, which is pretty sweet because they're all like an hour long. So it's like dog years for comedy, dude. Like you get to do hour. So really helps to develop that material, and gonna work on building that new hour for my upcoming special. So I'm very excited about that. So if you know anyone in Australia or you're in Australia, please tell your friends, come to my show. It's just called Alex Tells Jokes. Yeah, I'm doing Perth, then Adelaide. Well, if I do Perth, then I'm going to Coffs Harbour, and then doing Port Macquarie, and then Adelaide Fringe. So that's what I got booked so far. Next thing on the docket real quick, we just launched the Happy Camper Tour. So my 2024 summer tour is now live. There are still some dates that are coming online. We're a little behind on the launch. It was the biggest launch we've ever done, so it's like 35 dates, I think, something like that. And all across Western Canada, BC, Alberta, Saskatoon. If you want to save some money on tickets, use the code ATJ, Alex Tells Jokes. That'll save you 25% on most shows. I think it's almost on all of them, other than maybe some of like I'm doing a couple comedy clubs in that, so I don't have a say in that. So I don't think they're on there. Maybe they are, I don't know. Try it out. If it works, great. Okay, so how did I become a stand-up comedian? So I got a few little notes here to try and remember, just to give it some sort of chronological order, because I'm very loose in these podcasts. So I always loved stand-up comedy as a kid. Like I really liked it. Never thought I would do it, but I just enjoyed it. I remember in grade 8, we had to do, it was like one of those like introspection quizzes. Introspection, is that right? That's right, eh? And they'd be like, what makes you happy? What makes you sad? One of them is like, what do you think is funny? And I remember even at that age, so grade 8, you're like 12 or 13, I wrote On a Stage in Montreal. So it was just for laughs. That was what I thought was funny. And I just remember stand-up comedy always seemed the funniest thing to me. So it used to always be on when I would get home from school on Channel 34 on the Comedy Network. And me and my buddy Mike Stang, we used to watch it all the time, and then we would just quote it. And we'd always just quote comedians' punchlines and jokes. So that was pretty fun. And then I remember the first comedian I really started like quoting was Russell Peters. I think that's very common for so many Canadians. I just remember his bit like someone's gonna get hurt real bad. So I would do that all the time. And I remember telling my grandma, like I was doing that one time when my grandma took me out for lunch or whatever, and I was telling her it, and my grandma was like, "Wow," she's like, "You're really good at that. Like you should try do that." And I was like, "Grandma," I'm like, anyone could tell other people's jokes. It'd be so hard to write your own. I could never do that. And I believed that up until a few years ago. So the next comedian I really started to like was Dane Cook. So Dane Cook, he was the first comedian, I think, to have his bits animated. So I remember like E-Bombs World, you could go on there and you would watch, it was just like these funny stories about it was basically his stand-up bits turned into little cartoon videos. So he had the one about like why when you go in a public washroom is everything wet. And so there was that, and you would watch him and they were hilarious. And then I remember I went and watched him during his, I think it was the Vicious Circle tour. I think it would have been like 2006, 2007 in Vancouver at Rogers Arena. Me and my brother drove down, paid top dollar. I sat in the very front row, got to give him a high five, and it was so cool, man. I was like, this is the coolest, funnest thing ever. But still never really got into performing it. I was just like, oh, this is cool. I was working at the pulp mill at that time. I was like 19, 20. Didn't really know anywhere to do stand-up comedy. Like I grew up in Prince George, which is like northern BC. So it's like a population, 80,000, very industrial town. Pretty much it's like if you're not cutting down trees, you're not making money. Most people are working in trades or are like have a job somehow related to them. So comedy just never really seemed to be on the forefront. And then Joe Rogan actually was a big thing, like the podcast. That was a huge driver because once that started, my buddy was always watching, Mike Stang was always watching Rogan. And he's like, dude, we got to do a podcast. Like, these are so cool. We got to do one of these. So after a bunch of humming and hawing, I think we got drunk one day, one Christmas. I think it was like Christmas time. We were getting drunk. And Stinger just ordered on Amazon. He's like, dude, I'm ordering all the shit. I'm ordering mics. I'm ordering a mixer. And he just bought all the gear. And then I went and I built us a website. And then we figured out how to get this thing going. And then we got a podcast going. It was called Address This Mess. Tough one for a lispy guy. And we would just basically try and build a utopian society all the time. So we're always just trying to figure out, like, what is the best way to live? Like, how would we restructure society and all of that? And we ended up interviewing a comedian from New York. And this was way back, dude. I think we honestly, like, did it on the phone. Like, I think he, like, phoned in and we put the phone on speakerphone or something. Like, it was pretty wild the way we did it. And, yeah, it was great. And I just remember talking to him and saying, like, how I love stand-up comedy. I've always wanted to do it. I just have no idea how you would get into it because, you know, I would use the excuse, I'm from a small town. No one does it. I don't know how. So a couple weeks later, someone heard that episode. So it was Brian Major out of Prince George. He was a local comic, is a local comic there. And he reached out to the show, wrote an email and said, hey, like, there's actually a group of us here that do it. We do like an open mic every other week at Alfredo's Pub. It was like this little dive bar in Prince George. And he asked me, he's like, do you want to come and do it? And I was like, dude, I can't say no now. My whole life I've been like, oh, I got to do this. And it was also at a time in my life where I was trying everything, man. I was like 26 years old. I just got into like skydiving. Travis Pastrana, he got me into like, you got to live your life. I watched 199 Lives of Travis Pastrana. And that guy's lived like 200 lives, dude. It's crazy. Like, just how much stuff that guy's done. And so it was always like, just try things. Don't be afraid of failing. So I was skydiving, bungee jumping. I remember I bought a dirt bike. I was snowmobiling. Any adrenaline extreme sport I was in. I started playing hockey again. All of it. And comedy, I was like, sure, let's do that. I went out. I remember I had like a month to prepare. So I put together 5 minutes of what the best material I could come up with at the time was. And I went out and performed. I had like a lot of friends showed up, so that helped a lot. So there's probably like 30 people there, and it was a ton of fun. It was great. It went as good as it could have, and I really enjoyed it, yeah. And then I remember the Nancy O's, so there was like a local bar that had a pro show once a month. So once a month they would fly in a pro comic from Vancouver, and they would headline the Nancy O show, and us locals, we got to fill 30 minutes of time. So we would get to open for them. There'd be a host and a bunch of us doing like 5 to 7 minutes. First comedian I ever got to open for was Michelle Shaughnessy, and it was great. I remember watching her, and she was so funny, like just beyond funny. I couldn't believe how funny she was, and it was amazing. Like, cause I only ever knew comedy as like big acts, like, oh, it was like Chris Rock, you know, Dave Chappelle, like that level of comedy. And then to see these people like that you've never heard of, and they're as funny as anyone you've seen on TV. I was like, this is a real thing? Like, this was crazy. So then 2 weeks later, Stinger started doing it. And then a month later, him and I did our first pro show together at Nancy O's and just got drunk and told jokes and laughed. And I remember saying to him, dude, I'm like, this is the funnest thing I've ever done in my life. We have to do this. Like, we got to do it. And I just kind of kept doing it from there. But there were times that it was like, it didn't go well. Like, I had some bad bombings. And then also, like, at the beginning, as much as it was fun for some of those shows, a lot of it's very exciting. But after a while, like, it's not that fun at the beginning because you suck. Like, that's the thing. You're just not good. So it's like, it's not crazy fun where you're like, I don't know if I want to do this every day. Like, there's a fun activity to do once a month or something, you know? So I kind of hummed and hawed, and at the same time, I think I was doing my apprenticeship for instrumentation mechanics. So I was like going to Vancouver and going to school. I did a bit of comedy when I was down there, and it didn't go well. It went very bad because I just wasn't good at comedy. And then when you get to the city and you start seeing these people that have been doing it, you're like, they are so good. And you're like, I don't know if I'll ever get to that level. So I like hummed and hawed about whether I wanted to do it or not. And I remember there were times I didn't perform for 6 months. And now this was over probably the period of 3 or 4 years. So I started when I was 26. When I quit my job to do it full time, I was 30, just before my 31st birthday. So, but I made the decision about 6 months before that. So what happened, I guess we had our first comedy club open in Prince George, which was Sonar Comedy Club. That opened up, and then I could get on stage every weekend, like multiple times a weekend even. And we had Alex Sparling, a pro comic from Vancouver. He ended up moving to Prince George, and he was there. And then he started like pushing me. He was like, "Hey man, like I know you don't like this comedy thing that much, but like you're really good. You should do this. Like you should be coming out more and more." And then I started going with him and started doing it. And in the beginning, what was hard too was it wasn't that fun, and I didn't have that many friends doing comedy. Like I had like John White was a good friend there. But there weren't that many people that, like, my close friends that were doing it. And I remember I would be, like, playing video games with all my buddies, or we'd be playing hockey. And it was like, "Hey, do you want to go to hockey, or do you want to go do this 5 minutes at the comedy club for 8 people or something?" And I was like, I don't want to leave all my friends. Like, you know, it's way funner hanging out with your friends. Like, that's where the fun is. But then I remember thinking about it, and I was like, well, why are all these people your friend? And most of my friends were from hockey, growing up playing hockey. And then I made a mental switch. I started thinking like, hey, what if you tried to make friends with comedians? That way when you go to these shows, whoever the headliner is, you're like, oh, I haven't seen Brett in forever. You know, now I'm going and hanging out with Brett. And it's like, that's your friend. And try and build these actual relationships through comedy. And that was a big switch because that made it a lot funner to go and do, even off stage. You're just hanging out with your friends. And Brett Martin, that's a guy I want to give a shout out to. He was the first guy to take me on the road. So I opened for him at Nancy O's, and he was so generous and kind, and he was like, "Hey man, like you're really good." And he was the first guy to tell me, he's like, "You could do this for a living, man." And I was like, "Really?" And he was like, "Yeah." He's like, "What are you doing tomorrow?" And I was like, "I don't know, man, nothing." And he's like, "I want you to come open for me in Kamloops. You want to come down?" And I was like, "What? Like I would love to." So I loaded up my truck, got in my truck, drove down, rented a hotel, and I did my first comedy show on the road. I did 5 minutes, and it was great. I had a ton of fun. It was for Drew McLean. Great Drew. He's an amazing man, dude. He actually passed away a couple years ago. Very, very sad. But yeah, shout out to Drew, my man. First guy to give me a producer to pay me for road work, which was really cool. Yeah, so anyway, Sonar, started doing a bunch of comedy. I had met, at the same time, I had met Eloise. So she's a tattoo artist out of Australia here. And she came and lived with me. I was very sad. I was very depressed. I was just getting ready to quit my job around this time. This would have been like July of 2018. July, maybe August of 2019. And I met Elle, and I was very depressed this time. I was very sad. I was trying to sell my house. I was ready to quit my job. And I wasn't even going to do comedy. I was going to sell everything. I was going to buy a camper van, and me and my dog Finley would just drive into Central America. And I was going to video blog it. That's where An Experiment Called Life came from. I was like, I'm going to do a vlog. I'm going to call it An Experiment Called Life. I'm going to film the whole thing. And then I'm just going to try and get views online and build a thing that way. And I'm going to live off of the money from selling my house and stuff. And it's actually very sad. My plan was not good. I was just like, I'll just do this. And if I run out of money and I don't make it, I'll stay alive as long as my dog's around. And then when he's gone, then I can end it all and get out of here. Which is very, very dark and not very fun. But I was just lost. I didn't know. I was so upset, dude. I was so depressed with life. I was just drinking and partying. I was doing drugs every weekend. Not every weekend, but a lot of them I was drinking and doing drugs. And it just wasn't good. And then I ended up meeting Elle, and Elle started really pushing me towards comedy. And she came and lived with me for like 2 months, and she was like, "Hey, comedy." And she would come to the club with me every weekend and be like, "Go on stage." And she'd sit in the corner and laugh and just cheer me on. And it was like the best. She would not let me sit at home. She's like, "You're going to do the club." And she really inspired me and told me about her story about she was going to school and then she quit to become a tattoo artist. And she's one of the best tattoo artists in the world, man. Like, go look up, it's Miss Knees, I think Miss_Knees on Instagram, and just look at the stuff she does, dude. It's phenomenal. I actually get to go see her in a couple weeks, which is really cool. I'm going to stay with her here. And yeah, she gave me the book, The Alchemist. That was a really good one. Also ended up reading the book, Man's Search for Meaning. That was very good. I started getting into meditation, started going to therapy, all of the things. Anyway, so this was, August, September. And so what I was saying is I was like, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play, I was going to try to sell my house. My house, water main burst, floods. So my house, I was supposed to list it for sale the next day. The next day it was supposed to go on sale like Monday. Sunday, I'm like going around, I have a realtor coming Monday to look at it and assess it, and then we're going to get ready to put it on the market. Sunday I go through and I'm just making sure everything's good with the house, making it look nice. And in the basement, I can hear water running. And I'm like, dude, there's no one here. Why is there water running? Did I leave a sink on upstairs or something? And then I go step in the hallway and it's soaked. And then I'm like, oh no, like there's something wrong. So I quickly run to the water main. I shut the water main off to the house. It doesn't stop. It's still pouring. So the water main burst under the foundation of the house. And so I had to phone the city. They had to come dig up the front lawn. Then it was like, had to phone insurance, and it was just a big ordeal. I remember I broke down, dude. I just started crying to my mom. And I was like, I'm never leaving. Like, I'm never getting out of this place. I'm never going to be able to quit. And I was so sad. I was so defeated. And my mom helped. She consoled me and helped me and like helped me turn into a positive where it's like, okay, look, man, like, you know, you didn't really have a plan. Like, I was literally just going to buy a van and drive to Central America. Like, now it's like, okay, it's going to take the winter to repair this. Your insurance is going to repair it. You're going to have a brand new basement. Your house is going to be worth more than when it was before. You're going to sell it for more in the springtime, which is a better time to like get out anyway, and gives you the winter to prepare and get ready. So I was like, okay, sweet. So that kind of came around. I was like, I'll play another year of competitive hockey. So I used to play like senior AA in the CIHL. So I was like, I'll go and do that with Quinnell. I got there and I got really fat over the summer, and I just went to the tryouts and I got cut. I was just too fat and out of shape, and it was awful. And now I was really sad because now I was like, great, now I'm stuck here for another year in the winter and I'm not playing hockey. And I just was so upset about it. But at that point was when I always told myself this. I said, play that hockey as long as you can. And as soon as you can't, then go and do comedy, because comedy was something you could do forever. Like, there was no time limit on comedy, so it was like do comedy and yeah, do that as long as you want, and then when do hockey as long as you can, and then when you can't play hockey at that level anymore, then do comedy. So now was my chance to do comedy. So I did. I phoned every headliner I could think of, emailed them all, and said, hey, well, I'm interested in starting to go on the road. I would love to learn how to do this. I have a good job. I'll pay my own way, all the things. I don't care about the money. I just want to learn how to do it. And I emailed everyone, and the only comedian who got back to me was Simon King. And Simon then reached out. He's like, hey, kid, like if you're serious about this and you want to learn, I'll teach you everything I know. So then Simon started bringing me on the road. He started teaching me how to book shows. So he started teaching me how to, like, I just basically would go online. I would type in live music and then the name of a city. And I would phone every pub and bar and just like, hey, would you be interested in hosting a comedy show? Would you be interested in hosting a comedy show? And I just started doing that and booking shows. And I remember the first show I got booked, I think, was Grand Prairie at a pub there. And it was very exciting. I was so happy. And I think we ended up making like $1,200 on the show. And so me and Simon chopped that up. And I was like, whoa, like this is like money. Like you can make money doing this. And so comedy, that was the big thing, dude. Like comedy was the first thing that was like fun that I could see a way to make money, to monetize. And that made it so much easier. So I could always see like the business side. You're like, dude, if you can get 50 people into a pub to pay you $20, that's $1,000. If you can do that a couple times a week, you can make a couple $1,000s a week, you know, you can live off of that. So then the plan shifted from selling everything, moving into a van, going to Central America, to like, hey, let's get an RV, something that we could live in. You know, I wanted something I could at least stand up in. and live in full time, and let's do this comedy thing. So then I started just going on the road with Simon as much as I could, doing shows. I remember we had our first big tour booked was like end of March, and it was in Alberta. Now I took a week off from work, and my plan was this. I always told myself, don't quit your job. Like I was trying to quit for like the end of May, but I was like, don't quit your job until you have sold your house and you got everything sorted. Like that's what you have to do. And I ended up end of March, we did the tour. It was my first time seeing what life on the road would be like just going, touring, doing shows, staying in hotels, going, and it was like the best. I had the funnest time. So I got back to work on Monday at the end of this thing, and I remember sitting there at my desk, and it was like, got in at 7 o'clock, but it's probably a lie, probably 7:30, was always late for work. And then I remember like sitting there, and it was like, by 9 o'clock, I was like, I'm done. Like, I can't do this. I don't want to do this anymore. And I walked up to HR and I was like, hey, I want to quit. And they just kind of laughed. So I worked at a pulp mill. So I was at a Prince George Pulp. I was a power engineer. And at that time, I just finished my instrumentation mechanics, my trade. And that was always the thing, is like with trades, you're always like, get a trade and then you can fall back on it later and go do what you want. I found nobody goes and does what they want. They just stay there because you end up with all these bills and stuff, man. And that's what it was. Like I had a house, I had a mortgage, I had no money. I was living paycheck to paycheck. It sucked. And I think that's why I was so depressed too. It's like you're working, doing a job you don't like, and you don't have any money anyway. So I was like, why am I doing it? Like sell everything, pay off all your debt, and then go do something you like to do, and you'll still have no money, but at least you're doing something fun. So I went to HR, I was like, I want to quit. And they kind of laughed. They're like, okay. And they're like, I didn't get it. I was like, well, like I want it. Like, I don't know what, like, how do I quit? And they're like, are you serious? And I was like, yeah. And when I realized, I didn't know this time, it was April 1st. It was literally April Fool's Day. And I was like, I'm quitting my job to be a comedian. And everyone's like, okay, buddy. Like, sure you are. And I remember, so I ended up like putting in my paperwork. I was like, I'm going to quit. I think May 1st, we got all of our new vacation for the year. So I think I put my final day as like May 31st. And what I did was I'll work till the end of April, then I'll use all my vacation, so I'll have all of May off, and then when I run out of vacation, I'll quit. So that was the plan. So quickly got the house up for sale. I remember, dude, this all worked out like a dream come true. Like, you could not have had this work any better, dude. Like, and that's the thing that really made me start becoming more of a hippie and believing in like the universe, was once I decided what I was doing, like everything fell into line. It was crazy. So I was like, I need to get a bigger RV. I had some parameters. I was like, it has to be, my budget was $35,000. I wanted it to be like, the small ones were 19 feet. The bigger ones were like 23. The 19-foot ones, the bed, your kitchen table was the bed. And I remember, I'm like, I already hate making my bed. I don't want to have to make it into a kitchen table. So I was like, I want a bed that's separate from the kitchen table. I want to be able to stand up in it. It has to have a bathroom. Has to have an onboard generator. And I want like a fridge and a stove. And those were basically it. But when I looked at all of those ones, they were like $50,000 or more. And I was like, like after selling everything, I'm like, dude, I'm going to have like 70 grand, you know? And if I spend 50 of it on the RV, like I have to figure out a way to make money and quick. So I was like, 35,000 was kind of my budget. And I remember a guy from the mill came up to me and he was like, hey man, you know those RVs you've been looking at? There's one down at the repo yard right now in town. You should go take a look. And so I drove down there. It's literally that exact thing. It's a 23-foot, like separate onboard generator, like separate bed, there's a bathroom, stand up in it, onboard generator, all the things, fridge, stove, all of it. And it was a repo. So you're like, how much is it? And they're like, well, you put a bid in. You just bid whatever you want and then they'll either take it or not. And I was like, oh. So I was like, well, I remember saying to my dad, my dad went and looked at it, and I remember going to do a thing, and I put in a bid of $35,000, and then my dad pulled me outside real quick, and he's like, hey, do $35,100. And I was like, why? And he's like, cause if somebody, 35,000 is a round number, someone probably bid that number. If you put the extra 100, you may win the bid. Like, because it was closing on the Friday. They had bids in on it. They're not allowed to tell you what they are. And I remember I made the bid, so I went 35,100. And when I handed that paper to him, the guy started to laugh at the repo yard. And he's like, oh, I think you're going to have, he's like, I think there's going to be a very upset person. And I was like, why? Did I get it? He's like, I can't say, but anyway, yeah. He's like, good luck, kid. And I ended up winning the bid, and I got it. And at the time, too, I remember I was reading a book, a hippie book called The Universe Has Your Back. And they told you had to pick a universal sign. And the universal sign I picked was elephants. My mother always had our house full of elephants, always little elephant decorative things. I pack one around with me everywhere, set up over there on the desk beside my laptop. And that was my thing. So it was like, always look for your universal sign and yada yada. Anyway, I get this RV, $35,000, right on my budget, dude. And I go to insure it. And at the insurance place, I was like at the front desk, and the lady who was working with me, she was like super busy. There were a ton of people. One of the managers like, hey, actually, kid, come over here. Like, I'll help you. Come sit here, and I'll do it. And I go and sit at her desk. And at her desk is a giant elephant. And I was like, no way. So anyway, I insured the RV. So now I have my RV. Now I need to sell the house. This was the issue. Is I already quit my job and the house wasn't sold yet. So I'm like, dude, this house needs to sell because I had my first show June 1st in Penticton. I'm like, I need this house sold by the end of May. And I have no money. What did I do to put that bid in? I borrowed money from my parents. I borrowed money from my parents to put the bid in on the RV. That's what happened. And so now I'm like, I got to sell this house. I got to pay my parents back their money. And I have to figure out what I'm going to do. And what ended up happening? Oh yeah, so then I'm like, okay, here's the deal. 350,000 was like my goal to sell my house. 310 was the lowest I would take. 330 was like ideal, like that was like perfect. 350 was the dream. Now, needed it sold by June 1st. Again, hippie universe shit. Dude, my house sold May 31st. It closed the deal, and it was for $360,000. 10 grand more than even the highest one I'd set. So it was like, I couldn't believe it. Sold the house, everything went great. Now I got in the RV, and then I was on the road, dude, and I was just out doing shows. And at the beginning, the thing was, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know how to do stand-up comedy. I really jumped in like over my head. I had 20 minutes of terrible material. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't really have any shows booked. It was a very scary time. I remember all my friends were like, oh, where's your next show? And you're like, I don't know. Like, I didn't have stuff booked really, and I was just panicking. I had a bunch of money now saved up, so I had that, so it was like a safety net. And I had worked my whole life. I had got that job at the mill since I was 19, and now I was 31. It was my first time not having a job, and I had a bunch of money. And that summer, dude, I just drove around wasting money. Like, it was not wasting, like, it was just fun. I had a very, very fun time. You can actually go watch it all on this YouTube channel. You can watch me the whole time. I filmed every week, put it out there. And then it was very hard. I ended up did the summer, went to Australia. I ended up like doing a comedy festival, met some Australians. They taught me how to get into these festivals I'm doing here right now. Flew out in 2020, did that, and then COVID happened while I was here. And I will look back on my comedy career. I think COVID was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because what ended up happening is I ended up having to fly home from Australia. I had to go back into my parents' house and to use a Macklemore line, trust me, it's not dope to be 25 and move back to your parents' basement. Well, I was over 30 doing that. But what COVID did do for me, there are a couple of things. They had the CERB. So I qualified for the CERB. So I was getting $2,000 a month. And the best thing that it did was I didn't have to worry about producing shows. I didn't have to spend time trying to figure out how to get booked, how to produce shows, how to do any of it. So I could just focus on comedy because I was like, I need to learn how to do this. When I came to Australia, I was doing an hour of my first year. I was just bombing. It was terrible. I sucked. Did not have an hour. And I developed my writing routine when I was here. And then during COVID, I really just hammered down, like learn how to do comedy. I bought every joke writing book I could find, any books on stand-up comedy. I just started writing jokes. And then TikTok came around at that same time. So then I started doing a ton of TikTok. My ex-girlfriend, Alex, we had the same name. She's like, you got to do this TikTok thing, do it. And I didn't want to do it. And I was like, fine. So I started just posting, because I would try to write 5 dumb jokes a day. And then I just started posting these dumb setup punchline jokes. And within like 2 weeks, I started going viral. Had my first video hit 200,000 views, and it was very exciting. And I remember then it just snowballed. I was like, okay, write more jokes, write jokes, post. And I ended up getting over like 100,000 followers in the next 6 months doing this. And yeah, it was like amazing, because now I'm like, okay, I'm learning how to actually write jokes. And then I had a year's worth of, like, this went on, COVID was like a year and a half before we could do any shows. So now I just stockpiled all these jokes. Now I came back to performing. We started doing Zoom shows, and I started self-producing them. And that was my first thing of feeling like a producer. I started like booking comedians, because no one was working. So I could get comedians from all over the country. I could put them together. I could do shows. And yeah, I just started booking acts. And it was learning how to kind of structure a comedy show and then try to sell tickets. So I started learning how to do some Facebook ads. Then coming out of the pandemic, I then started getting on stage, and then I had to learn how to say these jokes, because you're doing them like a robot. Like, I'd learned how to write jokes but not perform them. So I was just like, in bed, I'm like a dirt bike, loud, powerful, and I come in 2 or 4 strokes. And so then that was like figuring out how to actually have a stage presence, what you're trying to do. And then it just kind of went from there. I started booking shows, booking pubs and bars. And then you started figuring out on the producing side that when you're producing a show, if you're doing it for 50 people or 500, it's the same amount of work, dude. Like, you still have to make a graphics kit. You have to do Facebook ads. You have to book acts. You have to do all these different things. And it just was not worth it. The margins are so small on the small shows that, like, even if you sell out, you make $50 after paying everyone and doing it. So then you're like, let's do these bigger shows. And that's where Hunger for Laughs was born. So then I was like, okay, I'm going to start renting these theaters. I'm going to put a bunch of acts on here. And I just phoned the most talented people I could think of at the time, which was like people I met in Australia here was like Arissa Kelly, the foot archer, Chris Turner, the rapper, Ivan Decker, comedian, Simon King, comedian. And I put together this variety show and started doing theaters. And yeah, that was wild. So you're like now rented all these big theaters. I had no money. I was out of money. So what did I went to the bank and tried to take out a business loan. I was like, how do I do this? I need a business loan. They're like, you got to be a corporation. So I had to figure that out. Went to a lawyer, became a corporation. Once I got that sorted, went back to the bank, said I want money. They're like, you need a business plan. So I Googled that, made a business plan, went back to the bank. I'm like, I'm a corporation. Here's my business plan. I want money. They're like, you have no collateral. We're not giving you a loan. I was very upset. And I asked, like, how do entrepreneurs, how do people who have business ideas but no money get money? And my business advisor at Scotiabank, Gurnick, he was like, go and see Community Futures. That's what they do. So I went and found them, and they're like a nonprofit organization, and they help startups. That's what their whole thing is. They just help young entrepreneurs get money. I guess not even young entrepreneurs. I always say young. I'm 35. I'm so old, and I still like kid, young. You're not young, you dork. You're a grown-ass man. So then I went there, and they taught me a bunch of business stuff. They made me do like redo a business plan, taught me sales projections, did all the things. They gave me a micro loan for $25,000 secured against my RV. I used that to launch that Hunger for Laughs tour. Within a month, I was out of money, but I had ticket sales. So I could show them like, hey, look, I've sold tickets, but I have no money to actually do the tour now. So then I had to take out another loan. They gave me another $30,000, which was against my RV again. So then I had $60,000 in loans. And what ended up happening, we did the tour. I lost all the money. The tour went terrible. It went good performance-wise, but they were all half-full venues. I lost 10 grand on every show. There were 6 shows. I lost the whole 60,000. So now I was very defeated. This was 2020. And I'm skipping some stuff in here, so it was all over. This is like the end of 2022. So then I did the comedy tour, and now I'm out of money, and now I'm like, I have no money, and I have these business loans, and I owe them a bunch of money. But now I've learned so much, like how to actually produce shows. I, at this time, then was producing shows all across Canada, like Fredericton and different places. but I was doing them in pubs and bars and mostly for other comedians. And I just remember it was like a ton of work and it just wasn't fun, and you were just feeling like a producer, not a comedian, and you weren't making any money. Everyone else was making money that you were paying. And then I quickly, I made the decision to just bet on myself. I was like, just produce you. Like, just book your own shows. Just have you on them. That's the only way it's feasible. Plus, it's funner, because then even if the show loses money, at least you got to do comedy. So I shut down all those shows, just started doing mine. And it just started growing and doing well. Then we did the Hunger for Laughs tour again last year. I took out another loan to get that going. I had to borrow another $25,000, and I got some government grants. Thank goodness for those. And we did the tour, and it was very successful. I'm very, very happy with it. And then booked that. We did the East Coast tour, which was like a month ago. That went amazing, and now we're here. And so now we're just producing shows, and we just launched a Happy Camper tour, the biggest one ever. Anyway, that's a lot. That was the longest podcast I ever did by myself. I didn't think it would be that long. I'm like, this will be 10 minutes. There's like 35, 40 minutes. Might chop this into 2 parts. Who knows? Anyway, that's where we are today. I'm going to get out of here. I got to eat something, man. I got to go get some groceries at Woolies. I love you guys. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, just write into the show, info@AlexTellsJokes. Write in and I will talk about it. I would love to do that. Anyway, I will catch you guys later. Thanks for listening. I love you. Go to AlexTellsJokes.com. Check out the tour dates. Buy some tickets and tell your friends.